I know because I watched, most of your career. You have the Milwaukee run, you start putting up numbers, your number one pick, you get hurt, and then you end up in Golden State, and it's immediate that the numbers are just not going to be the same. How was it tough for you? I mean, you talk about being a teammate in the national stage, but you're still fairly young, and now it's like, hey, you're going to be getting like a couple looks a game and beating the shit out of people on screens for 30 minutes.
Yeah, look, it was a bit of an adjustment. I went from being working to being the number one, number two option in Milwaukee, and playing really well. Had a few injuries and all that kind of stuff, and then getting to Golden State. Thankfully, Scott Skiles was really instrumental in my career, as teaching me how to man the court defensively and really run the game defensively like a quarterback. And so when I got to Golden State, that was what was lacking there. There was no big that was physical, could rebound, could set screens, block shots, protect the rim. So I kind of figured out pretty early on there that I've got Steph and Klay next to me. I'd be an idiot to be, hey, coach, like, where's my touches? Like, when you got those two guys. So I just really focused on setting good screens, protecting the basket, making sure that the opposing team didn't get anything easy. And I was, it was a bit of an adjustment because I was used to getting 10, 15, 20 touches on the block a night in Milwaukee to 2 in Golden State. But I learned to grow with that, and we were winning. So if we weren't winning, probably would have voiced up a little bit more. The fact that we were starting to build something nice, I was like, I'm happy to play this niche. I'm happy to play that role and be a physical big man and do what it takes to help the team win, and we were winning. So it was great.
Yeah, I really, and I'm not saying this just because you're on, but I watch those games religiously because I just enjoyed the birth of this version of basketball with Golden State. But I think it's one of the most selfless things that I'd seen from a player. It wasn't like you were 15 years in and you anchored. That was what I thought was funny about those Warriors teams, because the guys were sort of soft spoken. They shot a ton of threes, and then people would be like, yeah, but are they tough enough? And it's like, they're actually number one defensively in like a ton of different metrics. And I always felt like you anchored that because you just understood positioning. You would show, and that's just a lot of effort without a lot of reward to constantly be anchoring a defense. And granted, you guys switched a lot of stuff there too, but I don't know that a lot of people would have done that at that stage of their career. I don't. So it's not really a question. It's just sort of an observation.
Yeah, and then you get a lot of credit for it at times. But true people know kind of, the value that I had, the value that even Draymond Green is starting to be more noticed now, even though his stats don't jump off the page. Guys like that have, when you look at the analytics, especially defensively. And I knew that with me on the floor in the paint, I knew, teams were shooting, a poor rate at the rim. If I wasn't blocking the shot, I was altering it. I was taking charges. So I tried to do that the best I could. And and then, I spoke about it on my podcast a couple of weeks ago. Like, the one thing that was crazy about that run was the shit that I used to get away with screening. It was all time. Like, I knew, in Milwaukee, if I said any of that, I'd be fouled out in the first quarter, right? But then I'm playing in Golden State. Golden State started to become that underdog America's type team that was building up. And I knew once Steph or Klay got hot, that the refs would be in the moment as well. And I could literally clothesline someone off the next pin down or whatever, because I knew, Klay's hit 3 in a row, the crowd's on their feet, he's going to hit the 4th, and I could punch someone in the face on the screen, knock him out, and they wouldn't call it, and he'd hit the 4th 3, and even the refs would be like, wow, and it was crazy. I always talk about that, and then I get traded to Dallas and then set those same screens out 3 fouls in the first quarter. It's just like, but yeah, it was crazy the stuff I used to get away with there.
I remember guys coming off those pin downs, and then I might lose them, and then I'd look back to where you were, and the guy was on the ground. He'd just be on the ground, like he never even made it. He never made it past it. What? I'm sure you asked about this all the time, and everybody that knows me knows how much I love watching the Warriors, and I argue for the Warrior stars and against others in the past. But I just like hearing from people that know them and played with them, personality wise. I think we get a sense of just how funny. And sometimes, I don't even mean aloof in a negative way with Klay, but what was your experience with Klay, the teammate and also the person?
I love Klay. He's just so nonchalant for an NBA superstar. Like, you have to tell him that he's an NBA superstar. He just goes about his business. Really, really good human being. Quirky. He's aloof at times. But yeah, I really grew into enjoying being around him. Early on, he didn't really say a whole lot when I first got there. He was growing into who he was, and even not just a basketball player, as a person. But the smallest things make him happy, and you love to see that. He's a very rare breed of an NBA superstar. Give him his dog, the beach, go for a mountain bike, just sitting there talking, playing some poker. He's happy, and that's very, very rare. So I really enjoyed my time with Klay, and still keep in touch with him to this day.
I always felt with Steph that despite the numbers and absurdity, and I always kind of mention the gravity when he's out there and how much it just freaks everybody out. So it's not always obvious, or if Durant is making a great play or LeBron's just going through the lane, that Steph's impact isn't always as obvious despite the shooting numbers. Did he get the sense of like what he was going to become? Did you, because you were there really at the beginning? I always thought that Denver series win and then the San Antonio win that could have gone your way, that was your first year there, but it was now like the first phase of what we saw over those years.
Yeah, I mean, probably not to this extent, like the dominance that he's had for so long. I mean, when I first got there, he had injury issues, so he had that ankle that just wouldn't get better, and he kept tweaking it, and there was questions about whether he'd even play 10 years in the league, which is, he smashed that out of the park now. We can look back, we're like, wow, it was not really even an issue, which is something that he had to work through. But we saw flashes of what he could do at practice, obviously, and at games. Consistency was a bit of a problem for him early on because of the injuries. I think he was in and out of the lineup. Before I got there, he was with the ball-dominant guy in Monte Ellis, so he'd have a 35-point night, and then the next two nights wouldn't touch it as much because Monte got hot or whatever it was, right? So I think once they moved Monte, the keys were really his, and I think that gave him some confidence. And then the rest was history. They let him play. I mean, and as a coach of Steph, early on, I think Mark Jackson did a good job of letting him roll at times and taking what would be perceived a bad shot for anybody else. You let Steph take, and then that built his confidence. Like, back 10 years ago, if someone pulled up for where Steph's pulling up today, you get benched with most coaches, right? Especially if you miss one. Whereas Mark let him roll with that and got the confidence up. And then obviously Steve came in and gave him a whole another dimension of challenging him not to turn the ball over and not to be so loose with the ball. And Steph just continued to grow. And he is one of those guys that he has it, whether he picks up a dart and throws in a dart ball for the first time, like he's almost bullseyeing. He's just one of those guys that has it. And then you factor that in with his work ethic and you get Steph Curry. But that's a very rare breed, to have a guy like that. There's people out there that can work day and night and not have that level of shooting and prowess and skill that he has. But he was just amazing watching him on a daily basis. It makes you feel bad about your basketball abilities when you're around him, if that makes sense. Just a bad shooting day for him is still 30-40% better at practice than anyone else on the floor.
You mentioned Mark Jackson. I know that, in a way, there's a toughness part of it, the freedom for Steph. But I remember when I first heard the rumblings of there might be a better fit somewhere else. I know in the past, I don't want to get the quotes wrong, but I think there were times you sounded, at least publicly, like you weren't always in love with maybe what he was saying after the fact. What's the fairest way to assess the end of the Mark Jackson run as you guys transitioned into a different, obviously it ended up being Kerr, but I don't know if you look back at it differently now or in the moment how it felt.
Yeah, I think he was an integral part of the journey. I don't doubt that whatsoever. He was around at the Warriors, where the Warriors were a dumpster fire of an organization. Couldn't win games, couldn't get any, longevity with rosters. It was always 10 new guys every season. Who are we building around? Who's our guy? It was always like that. So he was good as far as bringing guys in, building a little bit of a culture there. But to be honest with you, I think he took us as far as we could go. And there were people within the locker room, coaches that thought we had a championship roster, and I don't think he believed that at that time, where other people did. But he took us as far as we could go. His style was a bit more old school, so he was more. Darren Erman ran our defense at the time, and Mike Malone, and they were really, really good with our defense. Mark's offense was more old school New York Knick. If you score, you'll get the next touch, and we're going to keep going to you until that dries out, and then, we're going to go to the next guy. That was kind of the mentality. And the problem with that was it really, certain guys struggled. Harrison Barnes was one that struggled a little bit in that system because he's stuck in the corner and let's say Steph's hot and everything's going through him for three quarters. you get to the fourth quarter, and any NBA team with half a brain is going to eventually decide to get the ball out of Steph's hands. And then it's swing to Harrison Barnes wide open in the corner, and a must-hit three because the other team's making a run. That's the type of shot to hit in basketball because he hasn't felt like he's been in the flow for three quarters. And that was the issue with Mark's offense, I thought. It was very, very isolation-based. So when Steve came in, he was big on getting it through hands, even if it was just for the point of just get it through hands just to get it through hands. And they used to chart passes per possession, and it was something ridiculous. Like, I think it was 4 or more passes a possession was 60+% for most games. And then the lower that went, it generally, like, you went 2 passes, it was like 40s. And guys really started to buy into that. So Steve's whole thing that came in was, I'm not throwing the baby out of the bathwater. I'm not changing everything you guys have done. You guys have been real successful. A few small tweaks. I want to move the ball more. And when we move the ball, I don't want to turn it over because you guys were terrible with turnovers. Turn the ball over way too much. So we can get our turnovers down by 4 or 5 a game and have more passes per possession. That's all I'm asking from you guys. And it was genius. Like, it just completely changed the way we played.
The funny thing is, anytime a team wins, like, I'll look at the different stuff, and I would say you never quite fixed the turnover thing, but it didn't matter. It was like the one thing that you would have statistically where you'd go, all right, well, that's a bad number. It's like, yeah, but all the other numbers are insane, so it doesn't matter. When you think about 16, this is going to sound, like somebody who doesn't understand, right? I doubt that you drive around and have moments where you go, I can't believe we blew that lead. But does it ever happen? Does it ever happen? Like, and again, to remind the audience, you didn't play, you were struggling to even stay on the floor. You were like 10 to 15 minutes. You don't play in 6 or 7. An argument could be made if you get 10 minutes in game 7, it swings, because I think Festus had some issues on a couple drives. But I mean, it's not like I'm expecting the rest of your life to be haunted by it, which would be kind of the outside. But when it does happen, what is that like when you think about that finals?
Yeah, it sucks. I mean, should have been back to back, and it was just tough. I didn't have a great final series the year before. We went really small with the death lineup. Didn't play a lot after game 3 in the year we won it. So my whole thing coming into the finals was like, don't give the coaches an opportunity to sit me. And I played really well the first 3 games. 4th game didn't play as well, but the first 3 out of 4 games played really well, and mainly commanding the paint. There was a game 1 or 2 I blocked LeBron 2 or 3 times in the paint. Got Kevin Love, contested a bunch of shots to the point where I knew, LeBron was coming off pick and rolls and looking for where I was, right? So that's half the battle won for me, because if you can get him to hesitate 1 second going downhill, it gives my guard, Andre, for instance, time to recover. So game 5, I blocked JR Smith's shot, barrels into my knee. I don't know what the hell he was doing, but did it almost a somersault into my knee, full hyperextension, bone on bone, like couldn't walk. Was out of action for 5 or 6 weeks, and I felt like the paint opened up after that for LeBron. And you look at the tape, and Kyrie, you look at how much pain attacks there were in game 6 and 7. Also, Draymond suspension too, and that's the beauty and the beast of a 7-game series. The momentum shifts are immense. There can be smallest things that happen. Draymond suspension, my injury. A lot of people don't know Andre Iguodala he had chronic back spasms throughout that series, could barely even move, and we're telling him to go and guard LeBron James. So there's those 3 things, and then they took momentum back, man, and you have to give them credit. But yeah, it still hurts to this day. I think when you're up 3-1, and just the way we demolished them the first 3 games, or 2 games, sorry, at home. We beat them by both games were 20, 30 points. They weren't even close after halftime. And then I think we dropped game 3, was it? And then, game 4, we win that, go home, feeling good about ourselves. They suspend Draymond, I get hurt. And then, credit to them, they stole it.
Was there ever, during that time, a conversation with Draymond? I mean, because at that point, the plays happened. It's a great argument that the momentum has shifted now after that. I'm sure you guys weren't thrilled when he was suspended. I've interviewed him about this in the past, and he's kind of like, I can just tell. He's like, what are you going to fucking tell me to be different? Like, good luck, But as a teammate, was there ever a moment where you could say to him, hey, we got to do this differently?
That's his strengths and his weakness, right? So Draymond's strength is the passion that he brings and the fire and the energy and always towing the line of about to fight you, about to get thrown out of a game by the ref, about to get into it with Steve Kerr. He's at his best when he's on that line. And unfortunately, he steps over that line sometimes, and then there's ramifications. And I think it was just the timing of it just wasn't great. It was in a final series, and he knows that. But I think if you ask Draymond to turn that off completely, it takes away from who he is as a basketball player and as a person. So it's a tough one. I mean, obviously, the hindsight's a beautiful thing. You say, Draymond, get ejected from every preseason game next season. Just keep it together for this one. But even the suspension was questionable. Like, did he really hit LeBron in the nuts? Most people, when they get stood over, they stand up aggressively the same way. So that's questionable as well. But I think just he had the body of negative work throughout the season with technicals. So I think, if that's a guy that only had 1 or 2 technicals in the season, I don't think they suspend him. Or give him an extra T for it because he doesn't have form, right? But Draymond's not a guy that you're going to sit down and have that conversation with, and you're going to tell him, "Hey, turn it down." He's going to tell you on the spot to where to go. So it's a tough one. You need to have that passion from him. But just the timing of it wasn't great.